Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, how good are cyclists at running? There's no doubt they've got the engine, but what about the technique? Some of the times and heart rates might surprise you. We've also got the European Cyclocross Championships and the latest roundup of rider transfers. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that fixed, predetermined criterion races are slightly embarrassing to watch. That was Primož Roglič braking before the line to ensure that Biniam Girmay got the win that he was supposed to get. However, it wasn't the race that was the most entertaining part of that event, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Fantastic stuff. We also learnt that Mark Cavendish won his final race as a professional rider at the Singapore Criterium. Actually, that hasn't happened yet, has it? I'll jot that down for this time next week. We also learned that Elisabeth is not flavour of the month over in Belgium. That fan, though, was soon led away by police, whilst Elisabeth and his management have said they'll put in a formal complaint. Now, I would assume that that was in relation to Elisabeth stamping on the wheel of a competitor in a race a couple of weeks back, for which he's already served a ban. But it doesn't really matter, does it? That kind of fan behaviour is not acceptable, and as others have already said, you'd be better off staying at home. We also learnt that it's probably not wise to jump back on a bike if your seat and seat post have fallen off. And finally, we learnt that running is the new cycling. At least it seems to be in the off-season. So I keep seeing runs pop up on my Strava feed from people I'm used to seeing on bikes. Mathieu van der Poel, for example. I mean, he isn't posting to Strava these days, but his good mate Freddie Ovett is. And last week he posted this picture of Mathieu joining him on his 10k run. The time? 47 minutes 52 seconds. An average pace of 4:39 a k. Now, we don't have the heart rate data from that run, but I can imagine it felt very steady for both of them. At the weekend, Freddie ran 40 k's in a time of 2 hours 36 minutes. I mean, why he didn't carry on for another 2k for a full marathon is beyond me, but very impressive nonetheless. Of course, Ovett has some pretty good genetics when it comes to running. Meanwhile, back in August, Van der Poel posted this picture to his Instagram account, and the thing that got everyone's tongues wagging was not the pace, 4:34 a k, but his average heart rate, just 114 beats per minute, the sort of effort most people would be making on a brisk walk. Now, we don't know if that was accurate, of course, but there's a decent chance that it was. As far as I know, Van der Poel has never done a marathon or even a half marathon, but one man who has is another of his training partners, Remco Evenepoel. He did some running at a high level at the same time as pursuing a career in football, and in 2017, at the age of 16, he ran a half marathon in a time of 1 hour, 16 minutes and 55 seconds. That is an average pace of 3 minutes 37 per kilometre. And that was good enough to finish 13th out of 4,500 runners, despite having not trained specifically for it. Other riders, such as Mike Woods, have come to cycling from a running background. He ran a sub-4 minute mile at the age of 19, and a couple of years later, he ran a 14 minute 14 second 5 kilometre before then turning his attention to cycling. But what about ex-pro cyclists who've dabbled in running in their retirement? Well, the most recent example is the former sprinter Nacer Bouhanni. Now, you'd have thought that a sprinter wouldn't fare particularly well in a long marathon, but Bouhanni is proof that top road sprinters also have the endurance and the engine to compete in those sprints in the first place. So he ran the Frankfurt Marathon a couple of weeks ago and posted a very impressive time. He completed it in 2 hours, 32 minutes and 34 seconds, an average pace of 3 minutes 40 per k, which is a mighty fine effort. Anyone that's ever run will undoubtedly agree with me. That got the ever studious Amati Puraili pondering the fastest ex-pro cyclist marathon times, and Bouhanni's is right up there. In fact, you may not even recognise the name of those who've gone faster. Daniel Atienza, a former Cofidis, Seiko and Polti pro, did 2 hours 29 minutes. Jerome Ciotti, a mountain bike world champion, who later gave that title back when he admitted to doping, did a 2 hour 28 minute marathon. But the fastest that he could find was Leonardo Calzavara, who did a 2:26. Calzavara was a pro for a few years in the late 90s and competed at 2 Giri and 1 Vuelta before retiring and becoming a truck driver/runner. On the women's side, the most accomplished runner I think is the legend that is Emma Pooley. Back in 2013, while still racing professionally on the road, she ran a 2 hour 44 in Lausanne, an event she won. She's a bloody good athlete, isn't she? And this seems like a suitable time actually to give a shout out to an old teammate of mine, not Emma Pooley, who I've just shouted out to, but probably a rider you've not heard of in fact. He's called Mark Casti. I was teammates with him in 2008, and it was that year where he led the Russ in Ireland before crashing out with a broken collarbone. Anyway, he did the Dublin Marathon just over a week ago and finished in a time of 2 hours 32 and 11 seconds. Rapid. That's an average pace of 3:38 per k or 5:51 per mile. Now, if you're wondering, yes, I am doing some running myself, but not those sorts of distances. So I've been doing the park run, which is 5 kilometres long for a few weeks now, and I'm averaging around 19:25. However, my PB is 18:17, and it's now my new life goal to try and beat that, which was set back in 2016 or 2017, I think it was. Feels like a long way off at the moment, but you've got to have an aim, right? Now, another former pro who's putting in a good running performance is Tom Dumoulin. So he did a 1 hour 10 half marathon just over a year ago in Amsterdam, which is a ridiculous average pace of 3 minutes 19 seconds per kilometre. Mollema, Pidcock, Van Aert, Van Empel, Alvarado and others have all posted some pretty quick runs during their road cycling careers, and Primož Roglic has even done some running during the Tour de France. But whilst that is out of the ordinary, running does seem to be a sport that more and more pro cyclists are doing at some point throughout the year. Years ago, it was frowned upon for the most part, in case it caused injury, I guess, but ironically, it's now being used as a way to reduce injury. So the impact you get from running is said to increase bone density. Anyway, let me know what you think. Which pro cyclist would make the best distance runner? And do you ever run yourself to complement your riding? Let me know in the comment section just down below. Right, on to cyclocross now, and I'll start with yesterday's European Championships, which took place in Pontevedra in Spain. In the men's race, there was, as always, a very strong Belgian contingent vying for the win, plus a number of Dutch, and also one Spaniard who was looking to cause an upset in his home country. And he very nearly did it. That man was Felipe Orts, who seemed to continue to make improvements year on year, doesn't he? So he was constantly part of the action, and even though it was an incredibly fast course, run off at 31 km per hour average, he and Thibaut Nace managed to get a gap on the rest. Those two had gone clear earlier on with Isabit, but the second time Nace accelerated was decisive. Orts was happy to work with him in front of his home crowd, but on the final lap, he chose to run the barriers instead of ride them. That gave Nace the gap he needed, and he gradually extended that all the way to the finish to take his first major elite cyclocross title. It was brilliant though to see Orts take a silver medal, undoubtedly the biggest result of his career. There would have been a sense of deja vu if he'd looked just at the women's result, as it was the same 1-2 as it has been for the past 2 seasons. Again, the racing was very tight on the course, but 3 riders separated themselves from the rest at around the midway point of the race. First, it was Alvarado and Van Empel, but bridging up to them was Lucinda Brandt, so 3 Dutch women out front. No surprise there. Soon after, things became tactical enough that the Italian Sara Casasola bridged back on, but on the final lap, Alvarado stretched things out again, and a slight coming together on a U-turn between Van Empel and Brandt looked like it might gift the win to Alvarado. However, Van Empel had different ideas, latching back on just before the sprint to the finish. After a very quick breather, she had enough left in the tank to come past her teammate before the line to retain her title. Brandt clung on for 3rd, with Casasola in 4th. Incidentally, Van Empel had also won the Koppenberg Cross X2O trophy 2 days beforehand, where the gaps were absolutely huge. Brandt was the closer to her on the day at 31 seconds. Casasola was at over a minute and a half, and only 6 rides in total were within 5 minutes of the winning time. And given that that series is done on cumulative time, it does seem a bit excessive to hold around on such a ridiculously tough course. In the men's, Lars van der Haar won by an equally sizable victory over Elie Iserbyt, with Toon Aerts on the third step of the podium. Dutch and Belgians filled the top 17 places on the day, except for one Brit, Thomas Mean, who took 11th. Cyclocross will continue this weekend with the X2O Trophy in Lokeren and the Super Prestige in Niel. And don't forget, you can watch a full season of live and on-demand racing if you subscribe to Discovery Plus or Max. A little bit of transfer news for you now, although things are starting to quieten down a little bit. The biggest news over the last week was probably the signing of Lucas Hamilton to Ineos Grenadiers. The 28-year-old Australian had been with Jayco since turning pro in 2018, but he's joined Ineos on what is reported to be a 1-year deal. Frenchman Alex Baudin is also leaving the team he's been with since turning pro, in that case Decathlon AG Tour. He completes EF Education Easy Post 2025 roster. So the 23-year-old recently finished 3rd overall at the Tour of Huangji, but also won the Tour de Limousin back in August of this year. Alpecin de Koenig had promoted 4 riders from the development team up to their World Tour squad. 3 of those are Belgians, Simon de Heer, Ramses de Bruyne, and double cyclocross national champion Emile Verstringer, and also the Dutchman Tibor Del Grosso, who's the current under-23 world cyclocross champion. The team also announced the signing of former U23 individual time trial world champion Johan Pryce-Petersen, who comes over from Bahrain victorious. And finally, Astana have announced yet another new recruit, this time the Italian Fausto Masnada from Soudal Quickstep. Oh, there is one more actually that was news since last week, but the worst kept secret in pro cycling, and that is that Demi Vollering is moving away from SD Works and joining FDJ Suez from next year. That's going to be a very strong team. Right, that is all for this week. I'll be back next week to wrap up a weekend of cyclocross and the Singapore Criterium, of course, to check if I was right earlier on. I'll see you then.